Hey. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I just went to a protest. If you're in the group me, I put like the link and all of the sort of like details in case like you wanted to come hang out. But like most specifically, I feel like it's really important to tell you a little bit about what I learned. Sorry, my roommate and her dog are playing fetch right outside the window. But ultimately, okay, so here are a couple of things that I want to tell you. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like having a mild identity crisis because I don't know, just like looking at yourself more often. I'm just like, who's that? Like, is that always what my mouth looks like when I say the word, like, whatever? It's weird. Okay, so a couple of things I learned about protest while I was doing this social distancing protest. But first, a couple of sort of foundational things about why performance or like public performance or political performance or like performative protest is something important and interesting to think about, particularly in performance art, right? So the first is that just like as we've been talking about all of this time, performance art is supposed to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to stimulate different ways of thinking about and imagining and understanding the world. And so when we put our bodies into the streets, right? Like a place they're not actually supposed to be unless they're in those like neat little crosswalked, little like dashed lines, specifically like a crosswalk is a performance, right? Like that crosswalk is where the state says, here is where you're allowed to walk. Anywhere else is not technically like where you're allowed to be. So the state's performance tells you about how you are supposed to behave. This is kind of like Desserteau, like tactics. Okay, I couldn't think of it. It's Desserteau is strategies and tactics. So strategies, I forgot which one is which. Desserteau, right, talks about strategies and tactics. So strategies are campaigns by the state or by the people who are in power to tell you about how they want you to behave. So a crosswalk, right? And then a tactic is something that the non-powerful groups of people do in order to protest, right? To say like, no, screw you and your strategy. I'm specifically going to figure out a way to get around that strategy. And the way I'm going to do that is by using a tactic. So it's not a subset of strategy. It's about, this is just like right when you Google strategies and tactics. And if you want to read into the practice of everyday life, it's really interesting and important, right? Especially for thinking about why protest is important. So similarly, Desserteau thinking about the practice of everyday life. I know some of you have thought about this because you've been thinking about it with Alan. And so for those of you who haven't, that's totally fine. Just like something to consider, right? So like the way that the public outside world is set up demands our specific performances. And so then when we do something outside of that specific performance, it might be considered a protest or a political performance of sorts. So, when you jaywalk, right? That's like technically like something that is outside of the realm of like what you're supposed to be doing. And we don't like necessarily think of that as like a huge sort of like tactic of how to change the world. Like, oh, like if we all jaywalk more, then the world will be a better place. It's not exactly like that. So some tactics are more useful and more poignant and more important than others. But so thinking about why public space is important, we can also turn to Hannah Arendt, who talks about the space of appearance. So there is something different, something magical, something fiery, something. There is something about when you put your body into a public space. Something happens. Sometimes it's beautiful, right? You go to a concert and you hear a live band and you're like, holy shit, I had no idea that music could feel like that, right? Sometimes you go to class, right? And you're like, man, this all just like is really different right now because we can't put our bodies in public spaces in the same ways we've been used to putting them in public spaces. So that's why it's so interesting to think about this like social distancing protest, right? So part of the reason why it's so interesting to think about this social distancing protest through the lenses of like queer performance theory, or about people who think about public space, is that we were actually in private space, right, the car, while we are attempting to take up public space. But because this is not a kind of protest that the state or even passerbys recognize, I think it hit a little diff, if you will, okay? And part of the reason why is that it's unrecognizable. So remember, right, when we think about performance histories or we think about framing, this is like Diana chapter 1, right, if you ever got there. So the framing of a performance means that part of it is about familiarity and about the performances that have come before it that people recognize and then can understand and relate to, right? And so when you see a bunch of people taking up street space, perhaps they might be dressed in particular ways, right? Like I always kind of like wear a little bit more black than I usually do. I'm always like in either like hiking boots or running shoes, like ready to run if I need to. We all had our faces covered, which was interesting because that was like a new reason for why you would have your face covered at a protest. This one was about social distancing and germs and keeping those things away from other folks. And usually it's about like making sure that you are unrecognizable so that you don't get targeted by the state or police, or if these images ever get leaked to the media, etc. So this protest is unrecognizable in some ways, and so people responded to it differently, right? So all of us got in our cars and all of us were in our cars and we were circling the state building, which I'm pretty sure no one is in right now. So also something interesting to think about. So we're circling, we're honking our horns, we've got signs on our car. There are like two people standing holding a banner in front of the state building that kind of is trying to give some context to the performance that's happening around us. But like by far and large, like people thought we were honking at them, like sorry. And like a lot of people were very frustrated by not understanding what was happening. That is not to say that people are not frustrated by performative things that take up their everyday spaces anyway, right? Like we know that like getting stuck in your car while like a performance is happening can be annoying, can be frustrating, can mean you're getting to work late, can mean, right, all of these things. But the reason why it still happens is because to put our bodies in public space in particular ways is still important. And maybe because of the pandemic, because of the way that technology is moving at a rapid pace, like it means something more. Like during the like 90s, early 2000s, when like lots of protests were happening, there was like a whole group of performance theorists who were like, oh, the space of appearance is dead. Like literally, like you can go searching for this and you'll find it. Like people who were like, public spaces don't mean the same things anymore. The use of technology. So like I'm also thinking like maybe like circa like 2008, 2009, when like the uprisings over Twitter, right, all like sort of colloquially known as Arab Spring, which is like kind of problematically named, but so when all of those uprisings were happening in different places, but utilizing things like Twitter, it was like the first time we had seen like technology really be actively pursued as a part of political performance. And so everyone was like, everything's gonna turn to internet, like that's it. The space of appearance just doesn't matter in the same way anymore. And so like when you hold a protest in the middle of the street in San Francisco or in New York or wherever, it just doesn't mean the same thing. Then Trump got elected. The Women's March happened. Lots of deportations, even like a solid amount of protesting like at the end of Obama's second term about deportations, about ICE, about, right, a lot of the same problems. I think I said this on Zoom and like, you know, whatever, but like Obama was not the shining bright star that we thought he was. Everyone who is president of like the most epic colonizers of like pretty much all time is like inherently kind of a like not like an ethical player, right? So even if we like one president more than we like another president, like because of, I don't know that I should put this on YouTube. I'm gonna think about it. Okay, so part of the reason why the space of appearance is so important and interesting to think about is that, well, like one, right, people like thought it really mattered, and then we're like, no, the internet matters way more, and now we're like, oh, because the internet is so prevalent, actually like the space, like public spaces matter in a different way now. There's a different context to that. And so what is perhaps most interesting to consider then is, what does like political performance mean now in the age of like the sort of technological boom, and also in the age of being outside is risky? So when we think about what it means to be outside, we have to think about some of those performance histories. We have to think about what's being expected of us right now. We have to think about like also just what it feels like. Like, does it feel different to be outside right now? Like, doesn't it kind of just feel like a little bit like, should I be doing this? Should I be here? Should I be outside? Like, sometimes I am like walking through the neighborhood and I'm like, oh yes, you know, fresh air, we couldn't fight illness and whatever without it. And then sometimes I'm walking and I'm like, oh my God, like I should have stayed inside. Like I can't believe I didn't stay inside. Okay, so here we are, we're studying. So at the end of chapter 5, and like, yeah, that's chapter 5, or is it chapter 6? No, yeah, it's the end of chapter 5, and it's the part about animatives, right? So we talked about J.L. Austin and how like performative is technically like a really specific word that means like you uttered something exactly in the exact right way, like you have to have an officiant and like a bride and a groom, and like when the groom and the bride and the officiant all decide like, okay, now you're married, then like you are, after you say like I do and have a kiss or whatever. So it's like, sometimes like the things that we say are really important, but they are only important under specific context, like if you have the right qualifications and things. So then Diana's like, okay, fine, you can have your performative, J.L. Austin, we don't care. We're gonna talk about animatives. So animatives is, we're on page 127, okay, it's this page. So we're on page 127, we're on page 127, and it says, animatives, as I conceive of them, are the inappropriate response to a performative utterance. They challenge or exceed discursive formulation. So discursive, right, a performative utterance, these are all about like words sort of specifically, but Diana gets more into it, right? So animatives are part movement, as in animation, part identity, being or soul, as in anima or life, but the term captures the fundamental movement that is life, or that animates embodied practice. So it's essentially, right, thinking about, okay, listen, we can't just talk about words, we can't just talk about actions, we have to talk about like the sort of coming together of these things, and what are the actions and words and or whatever, what are the performances that give us life? And one of those things is protest, right? Like very, very like like straightforwardly. Like without the labor movement, we wouldn't have the kinds of life that we have now. Without all different kinds of protests, like there would be people who have less life, less rights, less, so like what is life? Is it about the ability to have like the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Is it about like getting to be seen and like legitimized by a particular government? Is it about like all, like, I don't know, right? You have to decide what is life giving. And so Diana's like, okay, animatives. But so I think that protest is an animative. It gives people life, and it also challenges the ways that we think about spaces, actions, and rules. So in a regular protest, or in a protest pre-COVID-19, we would have all put our bodies, in whatever way, shape, or form, but not really our cars, our bodies, in the street, walked through those streets, held signs, people would honk, other people would be like, wah, 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 wah. There's a, just as you go to the theater and you sit down and you eat a popcorn while you're watching your movie, right? Like, we know how protest goes. It's actually like really useful to neoliberal, like non-protest wanting people for the performance of protest to be really specific and like we don't have to guess about it, right? And so this was one of the things that organizing in San Francisco is so freaking obnoxious, because everyone only ever wants to just march down Market into the Mission, or down Market into the Castro. You swing around, you go back, or you go back up Van Ness or whatever, but it's like always the same shit. And to be fair, it's like those people, like the people who live along those routes, are either like have joined in and become like were bystanders and are now protesters, which Diana also gets to in chapter 7. It's like the ultimate, like one of the sort of ultimate goals of changing public spaces, to have people change them along with you. This is about world making, right? About like imagining something different and saying like, if we could walk through the streets all the time, or if we weren't walking through the streets because we didn't have to yell about concentration camps, what would the world be like? Maybe it would be different. Maybe it would be more exciting because we could focus on other things like art instead of like concentration camps, right? Like, we have to focus on the bad things because we have to get through the bad things in order to be able to fully enjoy the good things, So if someone is watching a protest happen and feels moved to participate, you've animated that person to believing the world could be different, because they woke up that day and didn't plan to protest necessarily. And so by the fact that you showed up in front of their door with a sign that spoke to them, that resonated with them in a way that they were like, oh shit, like I should also be on board with this, you've animated them, right? So protest is a performance. Almost always. Is protest always a performance? Are there protests that aren't performative or aren't performance? This is a good question. This is when I would normally be like, what do you think? Can you think of a protest that's not a performance? I can't think of one. Let me know if you can. But so ultimately, right? Animatives, it's important. We move people with protest. I didn't feel like this protest was particularly moving. I didn't feel moved. I was a part of it and I didn't feel moved. That feels like a problem. So how did we get there? How did we get to performance? Or how did we get to protest as an animative? It gives people life. It moves people, right? But that's about like protests in general. And this particular protest didn't quite hit the mark. Why? maybe for the reason that like performance is just damn near impossible to teach online. There's something about energy moving between people that makes protest particularly powerful as a performance. And like having our cars all in a line just like didn't really do it for me. And you know, like this could just be me being a little bit of a snob. I have to like recognize that, because like as someone who's like, oh man, there's no way to be like, as someone who's done some organizing, which just like, bleh. But as someone who's done some organizing, right? Like when we think about protest, particularly as performance, and as you all are thinking about performance and like having to create one, right? Whether it's an intervention or whether it's an incremental performance or whether it's just a performance in general, right? Like, how do you start? I wish that these folks who organized had started at, here's what I want. Instead, I think they started at, here's how we get there. So they have this like fancy radio machine where they took over a radio station. And so they were able to like broadcast into our cars like the chants, and then like we were chanting in our cars. It just felt a little indulgent, you know what I mean? It just felt like I was like chanting, like it was me and two roommates who went, and so we're like chanting, and I'm just like, no one can hear us. Like the windows are down, but we have masks on. No one had a bullhorn. Mine is still packed and we couldn't find it. And don't worry, that was also probably a part of what contributed to my frustration. So like personal context and internal noise is like still a part of the thing here. But like it just didn't feel like we were doing or we were getting at like what like a protest wants. Like, which is different for everyone. Sometimes protest is simply just about the spectacle. Sometimes it's simply just about like plugging up business as usual, right? So like that's one of the reasons why San Francisco protests love Market Street, is that we think of Market Street as this sort of like busy area where like everyone has to use Market Street in order to get where they want to go. So it's a great place to plug up traffic. It's just like not actually the truth, right? Like it's just like different parts of this city take different routes to places. And like, you know, 19th Avenue, like we don't do enough on 19th Avenue. There's Sunset, but like also like not a whole lot of like walking traffic on Sunset. So I'll give you that about Market. But like, it's just like, I went off on a tangent about San Francisco protesting, so I'm gonna reel back. Anyway, there's like specific things you want out of a protest, right? Like sometimes a protest is simply about the end result, like getting a picture of the end result, right? So like at Ocean Beach, like there's probably been like 5 or 6, they'll like get people to come onto Ocean Beach and organize their bodies in a word, and then they get a drone to fly up and they take a picture of the word. So there's like, you know, one that says resist, that was like right after 2016. They've done like other specific protests similarly to that, right? So what do you want out of that protest? You want the picture, right? You want the end. You're just getting a bunch of bodies there to make it look like everyone is on the same page, which, and you know, okay, yeah, they are. But so you want the end result, you want the picture. When you are traipsing down Market Street, you want to stop traffic, right? Okay. When you put a sign up in a particular place, in your house, on your car, in your office window, whatever, you want like that, you want that to be displayed, right? So what did this protest want? I don't know. I don't know what they wanted. I don't feel like they got a whole lot of pictures. I don't feel like they got a whole lot of spectacle. I don't like it'll be interesting. Like, I'm interested to know if the media is going to be interested in any of the pictures, in any of the video. It was like 7 cars driving around. I don't feel like we ever quite got all of the chanting together. There were no one had a megaphone, like, which was upsetting to me. As someone who likes to be loud and wants to yell, that was frustrating. I didn't understand how no one had a megaphone, and then I also didn't have my megaphone. I was doubly frustrated. Yeah, so I don't know what this protest wanted. It felt good in some moments just to be like, look at us, we can social distance and also like still be fighting for the same things. We can be so epically sad about like all of the things that are going on with our world right now, and we haven't forgotten that there are people in cages, and that like we said we weren't ever gonna let this happen again. So like that felt good. It felt good to be like, we can hold multiplicitous ideas and pains and trauma, and we can hold all of the bad things and also be like, look at us trying to do this good thing. And also, the place where we met was right in front of a tent city. And it was like all of us who had cars, like that was also the only way that you could participate in this protest, right? It was like if you had a car. So it's like we're in our cars right next to this tent city, like putting signs on the cars, and like an ambulance needs to be called for this person who is houseless and experiencing incredible, like, you know, financial disenfranchisement. And it was like a moment in which I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this. Or like, it felt tone deaf, which like, if anyone can think of a non-ableist way to say tone deaf, like, please let me know, because like a couple of my friends and I have been like really trying to think about it, and it was just, it like, I don't know, I can't think of a way to not, I don't know another term. It just felt, it felt silly in some ways to be like sitting there gearing up for our like cute little protest, and like here are a bunch of people that could really use our help also. So like, what do you do about the ethics of resources in terms of protest? Ethics about using resources during protest. This is important. It's like an age-old question, but the sort of example that I can specifically think about was when it became sort of like the hot button issue of the year, month, time being, that people were like, we have to get menstrual products into prisons specifically. Like, people were like, you know, there are all kinds of people who can't access there are all kinds of people who can't access menstrual products in prisons and jails, and we need to make sure that like folks get access to those resources. Kind of around the time when we were also starting to talk about the luxury tax, which like pads, tampons, right, other menstrual products were taxed specifically in a higher tax bracket because they were considered to be luxury items, which was like a slap in the face to people who like bleed all the time and have to just like deal with that constantly. But so around this time of protest, there were all different performative protests that people were engaging in. Some of the things that I saw were like people taking pads and opening them and then like sticking them to a light post and writing on the pad. Different things like that, right? So using the products that could be utilized, right? Okay, like one example I'm specifically thinking about was like someone did an entire installation of like pads and tampons, like covering walls. And then I think there was like blood splatter and like some messaging written on them. And the, you know, like when you read the little plaque next to the installation, it was like, people don't have access to this stuff, and like that's really crappy, and part of the reason why they don't have access to it is because of the stigmatization of periods, which is like about misogyny. And I'm not saying that like the only people who have periods are women. That's important. But right, because we live in an age in which gender is still viewed under the very oppressive and inaccurate binary, things about stigmatization of periods are about misogyny in a lot of ways. And that's a sort of very nuanced thing to have to think about, and kind of uncomfortable, especially for someone like me who's a trans activist and believes that there are infinite genders, etc., etc. But that's important. Feminized, right? So things that are taken by the system to be about women or femininity or whatever. It's not that they are, it's not about any kind of inherency to those things, but it's specifically about the way that our system frames it. That's important, right? We have to constantly be sort of toggling the line between the reality of the situation and what we want the situation to be. Because when we pretend like the situation is how we want it to be, we forget about the reality. Okay, so that rant aside, an entire room like covered with pads and tampons, and we were sitting in the political performance class at NYU, and like I have never seen people so angry in class, and I've taken lots of anger-inducing classes. The conversation about like you should have unlimited access to resources as an artist versus you should have just given those pads and tampons to people in prisons or jails or whatever you were talking about, because like now you've wasted a lot of resources. And like, ooh, that doesn't feel good. And then people are like, how can you say that art is a waste? Like, you're just like being like, just like all those other people who want to like cut the endowment, the National Endowment for the Arts. And you're participating. But it's like, at what point does political performance or political activists or political artivists, right? In whatever sort of like way, shape, or whatever, however you want to talk about it, like, there is no question in my mind that multiple things are true here. One, art is really important and we need it. And we need it in order to make people think and feel uncomfortable, etc. We need that. We need art. We need resources. And by we, I mean actually like not even, like I've kind of got everything I need right now. Like there are a lot of people in this world who need resources, who need like just straight up resources, and who also need access to resources, who don't have them. And so to use resources that could be utilized in some other utilitarian way to call it art doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel great. When I originally saw the installation, I was like, ha ha ha, everyone who's ever talked shit about any kind of period or feels uncomfortable with it is gonna have to walk through that room full of pads and tampons that look like they came out of people's vaginas, and ha ha ha. And then I was like, 1, 2, 3, 4, like just like the sheer number of sanitary products. It felt like a waste. It did feel like a waste. Art is not a waste, but that specific art installation felt borderline like a waste. So, as we're like sitting there with our signs and like this, you know, right, we're confronted with the houseless population. We're confronted with the ways in which houseless populations don't have easy access to medical care, and so then like end up having to have things like ambulances called because they, you know, have to wait until the absolute last minute to go to any kind of hospital or doctor because they don't have health care, because we don't believe. Anyway, it felt like a moment in which resources were being utilized in a way that didn't feel great. And also, like, and this is where, like, you may have heard the term, like, the oppression Olympics comes in. Or, like, anytime we talk about, like, why a hierarchy, like, isn't useful to us, like, in a variety of ways. Like, people in concentration camps, people without homes, people without health care. Like, how do I know where to put my energy? How do I know, like, at any given time, like, which group of people I need to be fighting for? And, like, I can hold things simultaneously, but I can't do things necessarily simultaneously. And one of the biggest critiques that performances, particularly political performances, particularly protests, is every political performance a protest? No, it's not. That one I know for sure. Not every political performance is a protest. Every time Trump gets behind a podium, it's a political performance and it's not a protest. Like, not just him, but just, like, you know, any political performance is not always protest. Is protest always political performance? I don't know. That one's a little harder. But so, political performance, protest. How do we decide what gets our attention at any given time? Like, yeah, how do you hierarchize that? I think that is a shitty question we all have to contend with, and it's not good. The biggest critique of protest is, like, it was all over the place. They didn't have a goal. They didn't have demands. They didn't have, like, this, that, or the other. They just, like, were standing there in the street, like, waving things around. And so, like, yeah, like, similarly, yeah, like, when you do this, it gets really awkward, right? Like, I went to the Women's March, excuse me, I know, I'm sorry, in San Francisco, like, the very first one that they did. I, like, brought a bunch of, like, protest babies, and was like, look, like, this will be very chill and easy for you to feel good about. And so we're, like, you know, sitting in the thing, and, like, we wanted to chant, like, my body, my choice, and people were like, her body, her choice. And we were like, oh, like, you know, there are, like, people who use, like, they, them, or he, him pronouns who have uteruses, and, like, also, like, whoever you are, like, it should be your choice, like, whether you have a uterus or not. And so, like, why would we say her when we mean, like, everyone? So let's just say my body, my choice, your body, your choice. Like, what's the deal? And it was like people didn't want to do that. And then it was like, okay, we want to be like, no human being's illegal. And then people, like, you know, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It was very clear that there was, like, some stark differences between some of us who were there and other people who were there. So when you try to make a protest too widespread, this happens, right? You can't actually get at the, like, niche thing that you want. So what I will say that was great about this protest is that it seemed clear that the message was shut down the ICE detention centers. Gavin Newsom right now in the state of California has some emergency powers because of the pandemic. And so he could use those powers for good, which to some people wouldn't feel good. And then if we had a governor who was, like, trying to use emergency powers to do bad things, that would also be bad. Framing here. I mean, if you feel like having people in then you're a Nazi. So if you think that concentration camps should exist, you're a Nazi. So that's objectively bad. And I don't even believe in objectivity. So whatever. What was the point? It was clear that this protest wanted the ICE detention centers, aka concentration camps, to be closed. So that was good. The messaging was clear. And that's an important part of public protest. That's an important part of protest. Public performance. Clear messaging. Unless like your specific message is to not be clear. Hi, welcome back to Performance Studies. Pandemic or not, there are no answers. So there's that. Okay. So, like, one more sort of, like, important thing to think about, right? Especially as you're all going to be writing your artist portfolio, or your artist statements, and thinking about, like, being a performance artist, is that one of the performance artists, one of the people who is featured in the book, around page 156, it's chapter 7, Regina Galindo, talks about, or like has given specific interviews where she talks about not feeling like an artist and certainly not feeling like an activist. And so like, what does it mean to identify as someone who either like wants to agitate the political realm and social world, the art world, to be an artist? I don't know. It's a lot. So just like thinking about identity, okay? This is Diana. I do not believe there is a purely political response to a political situation. We all respond in a way that is social. We are a part of everything that surrounds us, even if we close our eyes to that reality. So, you know, like we talk about ethics constantly as comm majors at San Francisco State. You're talking about hegemony all the time. You're talking about ethics. You're talking about hierarchy, oppression. And then every day we come to school, instead of like throwing ourselves in front of the camps and saying, no, we're not going to do this. So like ethics is a really tricky thing right now when you couldn't possibly participate in an unethical system in an ethical way, right? It's like one of the reasons why like there's no ethical consumption under late capitalism has become kind of like a, I don't know, rallying cry or a way to make like people feel better, honestly, right? Because like sometimes like you can't, like you need something instantly and you can't find it anywhere else. And so then you order it on Amazon because like our lives have been set up to insist that sometimes that's the truth, right? Like what's the meaning or what's the difference or what's the use or what does it do that we have the words like political and words like social? What does that do to us as humans? I think it arbitrarily separates. People think it's a political action to like protest the fact that we have people in concentration camps. But like I would call that a social action. It's also political, I guess. But like what is political that's not social? What's social but is not political? Because like I believe Audre Lorde when she tells us, right, we do not live single issue lives. And I also believe her when she says, I hope these are both Audre Lorde. I think they are. She's brilliant. She's a genius. Most of the things that she says are like things that we should all memorize and just like take as the truth. But she also says that the personal is the political, which means that like when we make decisions in the political realm, they affect people's real lives. Those are real lives in concentration camps that we have right here in San Francisco, the liberal bastion of this whole freaking world or this whole country or whatever you want to call it. Everyone's still like, it's wild to me. It's wild. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, what is political versus what is social? And what's the use of separating those things? Is the only use of separating those things so that the people in power get to have different kinds of power in different kinds of realms, and we feel more and more and more and more and more powerless as different parts of our lives, like the political part and the social part, get overtaken by different things at different times? Maybe. I don't know. It was a lot. But ultimately, okay, and then here's the thing, right? I have all these critiques. I'm being a super sourpuss about it. I'm just like, I'm gonna make this YouTube video unlisted because like, I don't want the organizer to find out about this, because I want the organizer to feel empowered by what just happened. I want the organizer to feel like they should be organizing more. I am inspired to organize more. I want to make sure that I know where my megaphone is the next time a protest pops up. I want to think about protesting in times of social distancing and what that could mean for us, what that could do for us, right? Like in a time in which it is increasingly more dangerous to be outside. There were a solid number of people today who went outside because it was also more ethical for us to engage in that danger than to just let the incredible danger of like the lives of the people in those camps, and also just the fact that they exist and we are like continuing to live our everyday lives as they exist. All of that is more dangerous. So like it was a cool moment to feel like there were people who felt like it was the most important thing to do today, to do this. That is really cool. And that is really important. And also, nothing's above critique. I miss y'all so much. I desperately wish this could have been a conversation. Talking to myself is so weird. I just, this is weird. It's really hard, but I really miss you. And it's like, if I look over here, does it feel like I'm looking at you versus like if I look here, like clearly I'm just looking at myself. I'm really sorry you had to deal with that. This is why I didn't become a YouTuber. I just don't think I could handle it. I dyed my hair. It got a little too orange. I'm gonna try and make it redder, pinker, hopefully, but probably just redder. Anyway, the collage thing about Wicked is also coming. I just like have 75 ideas. Maybe I just need to make it like in 3 installments or something. Give you the first one, get you excited about it to then come back for the next one. I don't know, but okay. Miss you. Inspired by you. I hope you're doing okay. If you want to talk about performance, let's set up a one-on-one. We're going to do office hours on Thursday next week. Okay, I think that's it. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.